On June 12, 2006, a call came into the American 911 emergency line. The caller's voice was chillingly calm. "I'm holding a hostage," he said. At the end of the call, he coldly and precisely recited an address before the line went dead. When you call 911, your location automatically pops up on their screens. So within just 5 minutes, the police had the place surrounded. 2 officers stealthily entered the home. What they found inside was baffling. They managed to apprehend the kidnapper and free the hostage, but the scene made no sense. The hostage was sitting calmly in her bedroom, while the kidnapper was just lounging in the living room. Even stranger, the hostage was the kidnapper's own daughter. When they arrested the father, the daughter screamed, cried, and ran to him, terrified. The father was just standing there, utterly bewildered by the entire situation. The problem, the voice on the 911 call. It was his voice, the way of speaking, the address, the phone number, it was all his. How was this possible? When the police questioned the daughter, she said, terrified, "It seems Mr. Purple is a man of his word. And what's coming next is even greater." For those of you seeing me for the first time, I am Abu Sadiq and I talk about everything strange and mysterious on this planet. As always, before we begin, remember, victory comes only through an hour of patience. Today, I'll tell you the story of a person they called the Hacking King. He was the king of hacking before hacking was even invented. Every story I've told involved disguise, infiltration, and tech exploit stories you could wrap your head around. But this story, everything about it is different. The method, the style, the motive, the way of hacking, the data, the sums of money involved, it's all in a league of its own. The protagonist of this story impersonated over 97 people. And the most bizarre part of it all, he was only 15 years old. Yet, he managed to wire the entire planet together. Don't be surprised by what I'm about to tell you, but picture this. This individual was completely blind. You might have heard a story like this before, but trust me, the details in this video are unknown. Nobody has talked about them. For those who found this video by chance and don't know us, we are a family of over 4.9 million people who love to learn every detail about the weirdest topics. Subscribe to the channel and join us on our road to 5 million subscribers. We're getting very close, and you won't regret it. As we always say, all stories may seem similar, but they're never the same as when I tell them. Peace be upon you. As always, before we dive into the story, I need to give you some background so you can understand everything you're about to hear. Because, my friend, even if the hero of this story was a demon, it's impossible to imagine the things he did. So, I need you to focus and wake up. Don't be surprised by anything I'm about to say. First, you need to know that God divided the human brain into regions and lobes. What does the human brain have to do with our story? Relax, bear with me. You'll soon understand where we're going. The human brain, specifically the cerebral cortex, is composed of lobes. Each lobe is responsible for a specific function. The auditory lobe, the visual lobe, the tactile lobe, and others. If you don't understand the word lobe, it simply means area. By the grace of God, the size and area of these lobes correspond to our activities and way of life. For instance, the visual lobe of an eagle is more developed than that of a mole living underground. The olfactory lobe in dogs, bears, and lions is more developed than in a canary. In humans, the lobes are proportionate to their daily skills. There isn't a huge difference. Humans perform all motor functions in a moderate, logical way. I know this might seem a bit complex, but as I said, all this explanation is so you can understand the details I'm about to tell you. What you absolutely need to know is this. The organ that isn't used atrophies. For example, if a person is deaf, the brain utilizes the unused auditory areas for something else. Since you don't hear, there's no need for a large auditory lobe. A person who can't see has a very small, almost non-existent visual lobe, but in return their auditory lobe becomes wider and more active. Their tactile lobe becomes stronger. Their balance lobe becomes larger because these functions must compensate for the eyes. A mute person might have a stronger sense of touch and feel the slightest vibration. Their eyesight might be sharper. Their average intelligence might even be higher. How does this help us? It helps us understand and know about the superhuman skills of our story's hero, which we'll learn about shortly, and understand how he managed all his operations. Our hero is Matthew Weigman, born April 20th, 1990, in Boston, Massachusetts. This child was diagnosed with optic nerve atrophy. Due to his health condition, his family arranged for special treatment, and he couldn't attend regular schools, so he was homeschooled. Whenever he went out and mingled with people, he was bullied. This continued until he was 12 years old. For this reason, he developed a deep resentment towards everyone. And as in any story I tell you, the harm isn't always just from society. Sometimes it's from the family itself. When he was 12, he woke up one day to discover that his father had left home and disappeared. There was immense pressure on his mother. In a moment of anger, she snapped at him. "Why do you even exist in my life? You're a punishment for something I did in the past, but I don't even know what it was." For a child to hear such a sentence from his own mother is unimaginable. Imagine being an outcast from the entire community, even from the closest people to you. For this reason, isolation completely dominated Matthew. His only refuge was the television. He would sit for hours listening to cartoons. He would switch between channels, following programs from one station to another, all alone, without help.
He memorized the remote control buttons and every channel number. This seems trivial compared to what's coming. Matthew would watch children's programs from morning until 10 at night. These programs were his entire life and greatly influenced his personality. Of course, he learned from them and imitated their way of speaking. As we said, he relied solely on his sense of hearing.
Now, here S, a very important noted S not clear from the sources. Did Matthew somehow develop his hearing and imitation skills through these programs, or was he inherently intelligent with a natural gift for imitation? The information wasn't clear. But in any case, the result was that Matthew possessed an incredible sense of hearing and an unnatural ability for mimicry. I'll tell you about things you wouldn't believe in a moment. On one occasion, specifically when Matthew was 13, a committee visited his mother. After reviewing his condition, they forced her to enroll him in a special school for the deaf and mute. The goal of this school was to integrate people of determination into society. Indeed, 2 years passed and things were fine until he turned 14. Around that time, he heard from his friends that they were getting into something called party line conference calls. A party line was a phone number you could call from a regular landline and enter a large group call. Hundreds of people could be on this call, all talking. Focus with me on the mechanism. The idea was that you'd call the number and enter the large group call where everyone was present. There could be 500 or even 1,000 people on the call. Naturally, it was usually a huge chaotic mess where no one could hear or understand anyone else. But typically, 2 or 3 people would be talking, and the rest were just listening in. Conversations and discussions would happen, sometimes intellectual, sometimes artistic. Someone might sing or play an instrument. The vibe was general. Let's call it the social media of its day. Within this call, there were things called rooms. You and a few others could enter a private call and talk there. You could exchange numbers and have a private conversation away from that whole world. Due to the extreme openness of the West at the time, these party line conference calls became a meeting place for people to get to know each other. They'd meet, pull each other into private calls, and the relationship would continue. In hundreds, maybe thousands of cases, people ended up getting married from these calls. A nice little side fact for you. Initially, this number was invented to become a meeting place for people to chat, with the goal of marketing and promoting telephone service so people would buy phones and try it out in these rooms. But the concept evolved to the stage we talked about. However, when social media arrived, it all ended. Anyway, Matthew started doing what his friends did. As soon as he got home, he'd sit and listen to these conference calls. For someone who couldn't see, these calls were a parallel universe. Here, you were just like anyone else listening and interacting with people. You were their equal. Therefore, Matthew would spend hours on these group calls. And here's something Matthew learned that no one else knew. He memorized people's phone numbers by their tone. Let me explain. Let's say 2 people were doing an interview and everyone was listening. If they wanted to bring a new person in to speak, that person wouldn't already be on the call. So, they would call them. Imagine you and I are talking on the phone, and we decide to bring, say, Mohammed Adnan on the line. We call him and add him to our conversation. But back then, when you called someone, you'd hear the dial tone for each number pressed. To this day, if you pay attention when you press the numbers to dial, each number makes a sound. Matthew had an incredible ability to memorize the tonal pitch of these numbers. The entire time he was on a group call, he'd listen and memorize the tonal pitch of people's numbers. If they called a girl named Jenny, everyone would hear the tone of the buttons being pressed. Matthew had a recorder. He wouldn't just press the number. He'd turn on the recording to capture the tone. He'd keep the recording running. Let's say the person who answered was a girl named Jenny. He'd say on the recording, "This tone is Jenny Swithin." He had collected the numbers of nearly 1,000 people, or regulars on the party line circuit. From the principle of its data, it's useful. You never know when you might use it. In that world, Matthew gained friends and admirers. The reason? He could imitate the voices of famous people, artists, presidents, well-known figures within the conference calls. Imagine, he spent 10 hours a day on these calls. Up until now, we're talking about a person just amusing himself, not doing anything else. Well, sir, there was a girl Matthew was infatuated with. He'd call her constantly, trying to get to know her. When he talked to her, he found out her home address and some personal details about her. The girl was 24. Matthew was just a young kid, 15 years old. Unfortunately, Matthew's intentions were not honorable at all. The girl threatened him, saying if he called again, she would tell the police. So, he decided to take revenge. How did he get his revenge? Because of the talent he possessed and his daily immersion in the calls, Matthew had met many people. Among them was someone who worked for a digital crime syndicate, a hacker. For that time, since Matthew could mimic voices, this man offered him a job with them. Why? To help them with impersonation scams. Initially, Matthew refused. He didn't see a need for it in his life. This person offered him the job multiple times, but Matthew kept refusing. When he had this problem with the girl, he said, "Okay, now I have to join this gang." This hacker said to Matthew, "Don't be afraid. We have a trick we use daily. We create an overlap in the network and change your caller ID. I hack the phone network, and when I call you, instead of my number showing up, someone else's number appears, so don't worry, work with us." So, when Matthew decided to work with them to get revenge, he contacted him and said, "I'll work with you." The man said, "All our activities are scams. We call someone, tell them we're employees from such and such bank, take their account number and password, and steal the money inside. We'll teach you the ropes and put you to work." Matthew said, "Before I work with you, I want to test this call on something personal." The guy said, "No problem," on the principle that he just wanted to test the call on something normal. But Matthew and this man hacked the phone network. This man had no idea what Matthew was planning. He set up the line for him. Matthew hacked the number of the girl who had rejected and threatened him. From her number, he called 911. When they answered, he modulated his voice to sound like an older man. He told them, "I'm drunk. I'm in a house with this girl, and I'm going to kill her and her family." He gave the police a deadline of just 5 minutes to bring the money and come. When the officer asked how much, he said, "It doesn't matter. Any amount. Just bring it and come." Indeed, Matthew's voice and his way of speaking confirmed he was a wildly drunk man. Can you imagine? Matthew called the police 150 times. Did you know that all the audio files of his calls are classified? The police have them but haven't released them to anyone, even after his story was uncovered. As skilled as he was, it's impossible to believe it was him. You couldn't tell if it was a woman, a large man, a young boy, someone distraught, calm or angry. He had a phenomenal ability for vocal expression. That's why the police said, in the case of these recordings, if the public heard them, they wouldn't believe it was him and would say the police are lying. So, the police went to the house and stormed the place, but found nothing. When the family asked what was happening and why, there was no answer. Even the girl didn't understand what was happening or expect Matthew to be behind it. But 3 days later, he called her and said one sentence: "What happened was just the beginning, and what's coming is greater." Now, here is a very important detail. The person who set up the line for Matthew to call was amazed and shocked by his skill and power. He never imagined Matthew was this good, so he told the rest of the group about him. "This guy's a genius. Forget about the theft stuff, we can use him for much bigger things." The leader of the group decided to test Matthew. "Can you imitate a woman's voice?" The surprise was that he sang in a woman's voice, and it was very beautiful. So he wasn't just able to imitate a woman's voice, he did the hardest thing, he sang in it. The gang leader told Matthew, "You will be the most important member of the group." However, Matthew, who was only 15 years old, said, "I agree, but on one condition. I must have access to the telephone network so that at any time, I can hack it and call any number I want." The guys agreed and sent the appropriate devices to his house, along with the software that allowed him to hack the international code. Remember when I told you at the beginning of the video that Matthew had about 1,000 numbers recorded on his device? He had a recording for each number's tone, saying, "This is so-and-so's number." For each of these numbers, Matthew had a prank prepared. He would call the police using their number and do the same thing. The police would storm the location and discover it was a false alarm. I just want you to imagine the situation. It wasn't normal. Imagine you're sitting at home, and suddenly the police swarm your house from all directions. On one occasion, Matthew pulled a prank on a guy. The police accidentally shot and killed him. They entered the house and shot him and he died. It happened by accident. Of course, the gang had no objection to what was happening because Matthew was phenomenal at theft and robbery operations. Why was Matthew stealing? Focus with me so I can tell you about the big, main plan that involved a huge theft carried out in stages. The first stage, the gang needed, by any means necessary, to get the employee data of a financial management company. If they could get their data, they could use Matthew to impersonate them and reach their high-value clients. The plan was for Matthew to call the phone company 50 times a day, each time from a different number, each time with a different voice, each time asking a different question. The goal was to memorize the employees' voices, their shift schedules, and their names. So, he'd know that on Saturday, from this time to that time, the employees answering were, say, 5 people. On Sunday, these people. On Monday, these people. He could figure out how many employees were in the company. At that time, there was something called a centralized call system. When you called the company, you'd get the employees in your own city. So, it was very easy to narrow down the number of employees and identify them. After 2 weeks of this work, Matthew knew the number of employees, their shifts, and their names. What he did was he focused on mimicking the voice of one specific female employee, so that if he was discovered, no one would believe it was him doing the talking. The gang got the company's internal number, not just the customer service number, but the private number for employees. Matthew focused on just one employee and studied her shift schedule in detail. Let's assume this employee's name was Laura. He called the company during Laura's shift, mimicked her voice, and spoke to another employee. Pretending to be Laura, he said, "I have a backlog of work, and I need to contact some of our top clients. Could you please give me the data for 10 top clients so I can get in touch with them and finish up? The employee, thinking it was Lara, gave him the data. The rest of the gang members were listening and recording everything. According to their plan, Lara would be on leave for the next 2 days. So they only had a 48-hour window to call these clients and complete the theft. They trained Matthew on the script he would use with the client. This was done in coordination with the rest of the gang. He would call the clients and speak to them in Lara's voice. He detailed them there was a problem with the bank where they kept their money and that the company needed their account details and PIN to secure it. Lara was convincing, and the clients gave her the numbers. The operations went smoothly. The result? The gang stole $1.5 million. Using his voice and style, Matthew obtained the data of all the clients. He had perfected the persona of the caring, gentle Lara. The stolen money was transferred to gift cards, and from the gift cards it was cashed out outside the United States. You'd expect Matthew became a millionaire and turned into a financial monster, right? But no, Matthew didn't take a single cent. He wasn't interested in the money at all. He was only interested in the genius of what he was doing and the admiration of his colleagues. He got his spending money from something else. He'd talk to guys online, pretending to be a girl, and scam money out of them. He had a system. Through this method, he managed to create stories and narratives. As for the theft, the story didn't stop there. In coordination with the gang, they managed to change a court ruling for a defendant. How? The gang asked Matthew to memorize the voice of a district attorney. They sent him recordings of the DA's voice at an hour's worth. Matthew listened to just 1 hour of it, repeating it and practicing until he mastered the voice. He called the gang leader, who was stunned by the accuracy. They then moved to the second phase. Of course, the leader had the whole plan figured out, but since Matthew was a child, they gave it to him in stages. One of the gang members explained to Matthew what he was going to do. They practiced for several days because it was a one-shot attempt. If they failed, the entire gang could be finished. When it was time for execution, they hacked the phone network. The gang hacked the required number. They called the police officer in charge of the evidence division. Matthew spoke to him, impersonating the D. He said, "We need file numbers such and such. This file is for the defendant, so I'm sending 2 agents from the FBI. Go outside and give them the file after they show you their official credentials." Of course, the voice was the DA's voice. The number was an official number, and the 2 agents outside had credentials and badges. It seemed perfectly normal for the officer to go out and hand them the file. And that's exactly what happened. Everything was forged, and they took the file. This file contained documents that proved the defendant's guilt, 100%. But where is that file now? It vanished. How much did the gang get for this operation? $600,000. How much did Matthew get? $100,000. He was the mastermind of this operation, and the gang leader gave him $100,000, practically against his will. Matthew had taken the gang to another level. Meanwhile, there was another person watching Matthew, intensely jealous of him. During this period, Matthew's hacker alias was his call sign. This guy tried to annoy Matthew in every way possible. But, come on, who did he think he was dealing with? Matthew had calculated everything. Since all the gang members were in one group, calls would be made to the members in one conference call. Matthew would hear the dial tone of each number, so he had memorized every single one of their numbers. Simply put, when he got annoyed with this guy, he looked up his number and his details. He managed to get his data and found out where he lived. He discovered he was renting an apartment in a residential complex. He called the building's owner and spoke to him in a woman's voice. He said, "The person living in this apartment is a sick man. He has issues with girls and is not clean." He told him, "Evict him from the building because the things he is doing in your apartment are not normal." The building owner called the police immediately and they caused a bit of a scene. The entire gang was almost exposed because of Matthew's foolishness. This guy he was annoying was a member of the gang. But let's just say he was a teenager and got angry, so his reaction wasn't normal at all. A person like that is dangerous. Another situation like this could have destroyed the whole gang. But the question now is, did this gang member who was subjected to such a bad situation just stay quiet? Of course not. This colleague of Matthew's from the gang apparently knew Matthew very well. He knew his old family stories and managed to track down Matthew's missing father. He sent Matthew his father's location, who he was living with, and audio recordings of his father. Sending these things was a message: don't challenge me, don't play with me. Now a very important and dangerous point emerged. Matthew and this person knew each other well. If one of them was exposed, the other would be exposed immediately. This person said, "He's just a kid, and he'll eventually get caught and exposed. I better get out of the USA entirely before I get exposed and humiliated alongside this kid." Indeed, this person withdrew from the gang. He left in a smooth way, moved to another country with his money, and started a new life. This man was 37 years old, meaning he had the awareness and knowledge to escape danger and avoid harm. But Matthew, he had gone off the deep end. He was arrogant with the power and thought he was untouchable. He said, "This guy ran away because he couldn't handle me. Not just him, no one on earth can stand in my way." At that point, Matthew demanded that the gang leader step down and let him take over. But the leader refused, and a dispute broke out between them. Matthew decided to change his name to Mr. Silent. The gang was forced to tolerate him because he was a one-of-a-kind person with this talent. But every story has an ending. And as I told you, Matthew had an obsession with girls. There was a girl he tried to get close to, but she rejected him. He threatened her as he did with every girl, saying, "I will destroy your life," as we said. On June 12, 2006, he called 911 and told them he was holding a girl hostage. The police arrived and found everything normal. The girl told them, "It's Mr. Silent. He keeps his promises, and from what I've heard, he won't stop at this." So, the police decided to monitor all her communications with the goal of reaching Mr. Silent Matthew. Matthew called her from a payphone and told her, "This isn't over. The best is yet to come." Indeed, Matthew dedicated all his time to tormenting this girl. He would place delivery orders to her address using her number. He'd call companies, book hotels in her name, and do many things using her data. He'd request cleaning services, catering, and all sorts of things for the house, everything using her number. He could do anything to hurt her. But Matthew didn't know that technology had advanced, and they could now trace calls. He didn't know back then that all the police needed was for him to stay on the line a little longer. Back in 2006, you could monitor a number of phone lines, but you couldn't monitor every line in the United States. Matthew was calling all sorts of companies randomly, all under this girl's name. The police asked the girl to communicate with Mr. Silent by any means possible. It was the only way they could catch him, against all expectations. After about a month, Matthew called the girl and asked her if she'd had enough or if he should keep playing with her. The girl tried to talk to him more, to keep him on the line longer. She apologized, cried, and promised him that she was done, that she had repented, and was ready to do anything. Of course, Matthew was thrilled, enjoying himself, and feeling a sense of euphoria. The call lasted just 11 minutes. That was all the police needed. They were at Matthew's door. Matthew was stunned by what happened. He was running 12 spoofing devices, making it seem impossible to trace him. But as I said, Matthew was skilled, but he didn't know the FBI had gotten even better and more advanced. The investigators and police were shocked when they saw him. Matthew, who had terrified and threatened 150 people in this manner, turned out to be blind. And on top of that, he was only 15 years old. This meant the authorities couldn't really punish him effectively, first, because he was a minor under the legal age, and second, because he had an exceptional health condition. 1,000 advocacy groups would protect him. So, what was the solution? They used threats and intimidation. They told him, "Your sentence right now is life in prison. But if you confess to everything and lead us to the gang, we'll get you a full pardon." They told him, "You're a child, and we know you're pure and clean inside. But there were bad people taking advantage of you. Remember, the pardon is yours. As soon as you lead us to the gang and we arrest them, we'll get you that pardon. We'll fix everything and say that you were just a child." They were tricking, and indeed Matthew agreed. The surprise isn't here. The surprise is that Matthew didn't just lead the police to the 12 gang members. Matthew had memorized the numbers of 169 people, all of them criminals. Matthew made the police arrest half of America. Even the investigators were stunned by his prowess in memorizing numbers and data. True to their word, he was pardoned and returned to a normal life. But would someone like him ever really reform? Matthew would pull a stunt every now and then. Sometimes he'd threaten a girl. Sometimes he'd go back to calling the police from numbers like that, making them raid innocent people's homes. Among the stunts he pulled, he hacked a police department. He kept doing this as a hobby, nothing more. This continued until April 20th, 2008. Imagine it's your birthday, you're happy and celebrating, and suddenly the police walk in and say, "Come with us." The surprise was that at that exact time he had just turned 18 years old. The police had been monitoring him. Everything was recorded, but they left him alone until he turned 18. To make a long story short, they sentenced him to 11 years in prison. But the surprise isn't here. The surprise, my friends, is that Matthew is not actually in prison. His data, records, and everything indicate he is imprisoned, but he is not in jail. The secrecy surrounding this individual is immense. All sources confirm that Matthew now works with the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI), and that he is the Joker in all the covert operations they run. On paper, he's in prison, but in reality, he's in an office, working on something else that neither you nor I will ever know. People like Matthew are a national treasure. Rest assured, the US intelligence agencies would never waste such an asset. This was our story for today. I hope you liked it. If you're interested in strange stories similar to this video, I recommend you watch this video. He likely points to another video. It's a story 1,000 times more incredible than this one, and I'm sure you'll like it a lot. Tell me your opinion in the comments. Was what Matthew did a true innate talent, or was it his dedication and development of his hearing sense that got him to this level? I will read all your comments. I am Abu Sadiq, peace, and I'll see you in the next video.